The story begins when Miyuki writes to Yahello to inform him, with deep regret, that an unexpected situation has arisen in her club that she cannot cancel, which is why she is forced to suspend their plans. In response to this, IG tries to appear understanding. He replies that she shouldn't worry and encourages her to do her best in her school activities. However, while traveling alone on the train, IG looks at his phone with silent sadness. Even though he doesn't show it outwardly, he deeply regrets that today was supposed to be the day they celebrated his birthday together. At that moment, his mind begins to wander into the past, nostalgically recalling the previous Christmas, when he finally gathered the courage to confess his feelings to his childhood friend. He clearly remembers how she accepted to be his girlfriend, tears of happiness in her eyes. From his perspective, Miyuki has always been an unreachable figure, almost like an idol he admired so much that, had it not been for the friendship they had shared since childhood, he probably would have never dared to speak to her. Even though they had already been in a relationship for half a year, he admits he still feels very nervous and confused, to the point that his shyness hasn't even allowed him to kiss her. Back in the present, IG looks at his phone in disbelief, hurt by the fact that he never imagined Miyuki would stand him up on what was supposed to be their first official date. As he gazes out the train window at the city, he feels frustrated thinking about all the effort he put into planning a day that ended before it even began. Upon arriving at the movie theater, IG walks with his head down through the crowd. Each step feels heavier due to the emptiness left by Miyuki's absence, right where the two of them were supposed to be together. In his mind, he can't help but imagine what could have happened in the darkness of the theater. He sees himself gathering the courage to gently hold her hand while watching the film. However, he quickly shakes his head forcefully, completely embarrassed and blushing, scolding himself for having such romantic thoughts. Later on, while wandering aimlessly through the streets, IG unexpectedly comes across a couple kissing passionately in public. The sight startles him, as he is not used to witnessing such open displays of affection. As he continues walking through the area, he begins to realize it wasn't an isolated case. Around him, several couples are walking arm in arm or exchanging intimate gestures. Somewhat bewildered, IG starts observing his surroundings more closely. That's when he understands the nature of the place. He is in an area known for being filled with love hotels. Surprise completely overtakes him, and his face turns bright red upon realizing where he has ended up. In that instant, he can't help but imagine himself in a similar situation with Miyuki. However, overwhelmed by both the atmosphere and his own thoughts, he begins to feel ridiculous. In his mind, he keeps repeating that he looks like a fool and concludes that the best thing to do would be to go home immediately. Just then, a familiar voice abruptly pulls him out of his thoughts. IG turns around in surprise, and what he sees leaves him even more stunned. Miyuki is walking cheerfully, arm in arm with another guy. Her demeanor is completely different. She looks radiant and close to this unknown young man. IG is paralyzed, murmuring her name in disbelief, unable to comprehend what he's seeing. Miyuki, noticing him, also becomes confused. She barely manages to say IG's name, while the boy accompanying her stares at IG coldly. The tension between the three becomes immediate and palpable. Finally, it is Miyuki who breaks the silence. With a mix of surprise and nervousness, she takes a few steps toward IG and asks him what he is doing there. IG, visibly shaken, approaches Miyuki and tries to confront her, his voice charged with emotion. Without thinking, he grabs her arm and demands an explanation for everything that's happening. However, Miyuki immediately reacts, complaining in pain. This causes him to release her arm at once. Overwhelmed by guilt, IG stammers a rushed apology upon seeing that he hurt her. But before he can do or say anything else, the blonde boy accompanying Miyuki steps in between them with a cold demeanor. Without saying a word, he delivers a strong slap to IG, hitting him with such force that IG falls to the ground, dazed and bleeding slightly from the impact. IG tries to get up as the other boy confronts him with a mixture of anger and contempt. Shouting furiously, he accuses IG of being an impulsive fool and demands to know what the hell he thought he was doing to his girl. Completely confused, IG can only stammer in disbelief. Faced with that scene, the blonde boy continued his verbal assault. With an increasingly aggressive tone, he claimed that he didn't understand anything IG was saying or who IG thought he was fooling. He then looked at him with disdain and hurled another accusation, asking whether IG was Miyuki's stalker. The harshness of those words struck directly at IG's self-esteem, leaving him visibly shaken. The tension escalated even further when the blonde boy demanded that Miyuki intervene. He told her to speak up, to say something as well. Then, with a cynical smile forming on his face, he stated that Miyuki only dated IG because they were childhood friends. He added that she had confessed to him that she found IG boring, that she disliked holding his hand because it was always sweaty, and that such closeness disgusted her. Throughout all of this, Miyuki remained silent, trembling, neither contradicting him nor daring to look directly at IG. The pain on IG's face was unmistakable. With a broken voice and a mix of disbelief and anguish, he could barely utter her name, desperately trying to understand what was happening. However, IG's expression darkened even further when the blonde man mentioned that those were the very things Miyuki always told him when they slept together. Seeing that Miyuki continued to remain silent, the blonde boy decided to confront her directly. In a reproachful voice, he asked her what was going on, insinuating that if she liked IG so much, then there was no point in continuing like this. He told her that everything could end right there if that was what she wanted. Then, he forced her into an inescapable decision, demanding that she choose between staying with him or with IG. Confronted with such an ultimatum, Miyuki completely broke down. She began to beg him desperately not to leave her, pleading through tears that he not abandon her. Over and over again, she repeated that if Kondo-senpai left her, she wouldn't be able to go on living. In the midst of the scene, the blonde man, named Kondo, embraced her, holding her head with one hand, while IG watched everything from a distance, devastated and completely frozen. Kondo stroked Miyuki's hair condescendingly and told her that it was enough for him that she understood him. However, his smile was cruel, marked by a manipulative satisfaction, as if he knew he had her completely under his control. It was then that Miyuki, without lifting her gaze, began to describe how she now saw IG. She said that he was her childhood friend, yes, but that she also considered him a violent and persistent boyfriend. Then Miyuki raised her head, revealing a cynical smile and an empty gaze. With cutting coldness, she added that to her, he was nothing more than a pathetic stalker. Emotionally shattered, IG could barely whisper her name. He couldn't understand how the person he loved so deeply could now look at him with such contempt. The blonde boy, with a mocking tone and a crooked smile, told Miyuki to speak clearly. He said she should make it absolutely clear to that confused stalker, pointing at IG with obvious disdain. Then Miyuki turned toward IG, leaning against the other boy's chest. She looked at him firmly and said she was sorry, but that she couldn't continue with him anymore. She then added that she didn't want him to talk to her at school again. At that exact moment, upon hearing those words, IG felt the life he had considered happy until then completely begin to crumble. Later, he returned to his job at the Kitchen Ayano restaurant. As soon as he stepped through the door, his co-workers greeted him cheerfully, welcoming him back and noticing that he had returned earlier than usual. One of them, seeing how downcast he looked, asked if he hadn't eaten lunch and offered to make something for him. In a subdued tone, IG replied that no, he was fine, and thanked him. Later on, as he moved silently between the tables, a coworker called out to him with concern, noticing his unusual behavior. However, after that day, IG did nothing but shut himself away in his room. The emotional impact had been so overwhelming that he stayed in bed, unable to do anything, merely waiting for time to pass. Eventually, someone asked him if he didn't want to eat. From the other side of the door, IG barely managed to answer that yes. IG continued with his daily routine, but the empty stare he fixed on his plate made it clear that something inside him was not right. Day after day, he found himself trapped in a cycle he could not escape. Again and again, the same dreams returned to torment him. Nightmares that twisted his pain and forced him to relive it without mercy. In those nights, he dreamed of blurred scenes, of silhouettes moving through the shadows. Among them, he could make out his childhood friend, embracing another boy whom she called senpai. Within that dreamlike setting, she coldly told him that IG disgusted her. She confessed that she had only been kind to him because of their childhood bond, but that he had misinterpreted that kindness and ended up confessing his love to her. From behind a sheet of glass, IG watched helplessly. Meanwhile, the boy told Miyuki to forget about that repulsive guy, and that, from now on, she should look only at him. She responded between sighs with an enthusiastic yes. IG could not take it anymore. From his corner, he screamed desperately, begging for it all to stop. He then woke up with a start, trembling. He had reached a point where even sleeping had become a terrifying experience. During the day, at school, IG wandered through the hallways, completely unaware of those around him. He barely lifted his gaze, still trying to process what had happened with Miyuki. Suddenly, a classmate approached him from behind with a smile, enthusiastically asking whether he had made any progress with her. IG replied with a forced smile and a nervous laugh, trying to appear calm. Shortly afterward, a familiar voice called his name. It was Miyuki, walking alongside a friend and moving away while giving him a lively smile. IG watched them in silence, not daring to respond. Sometime earlier, in another moment from the past, IG had asked Miyuki whether there was someone she liked. Surprised by the question, she firmly denied it, and asked why he was suddenly asking something like that. Feeling somewhat uncomfortable, he defended himself by saying that he didn't have anyone either, and that the same was true for her. In a playful tone, Miyuki joked, reminding him that he had never shown interest in those kinds of things. Unexpectedly, she turned to him and asked if he wanted her to become his wife. IG, confused, barely managed to react, but she burst into laughter before clarifying that she was only joking. Still laughing, she repeated that it had all been a joke and asked him whether he had actually believed it. IG, still bewildered, could only ask her to stop. Later on, in a more recent encounter, IG came face to face with Miyuki. He took a step toward her, intending to say something, but no words came out. She looked at him in confusion, saying his name, but before she could continue, a female classmate stepped in firmly, demanding that he not come any closer to Miyuki. It was then that Miyuki herself accused him of being a violent man. Shocked and unable to understand what had just happened, IG could only stammer, while the weight of those words left him completely paralyzed. Without saying anything else, Miyuki's friend grabbed her arm forcefully, insisting that they leave. As they walked away down the hallway, the same classmate made it clear that she would not allow him to keep bothering Miyuki. As the two of them moved away with determined steps, the girl told her friend that she shouldn't feel bad, and that the best thing to do was to ignore guys like him. From behind, IG watched silently as they disappeared into the corridors. He neither responded nor tried to stop them. He simply lowered his gaze and murmured softly, consumed by confusion and sadness. Hours later, outside the front of the restaurant, Kitchen Ayano, time seemed to stand still. However, for IG, the worst had yet to come. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard the sound of a notification on his phone. Something stirred inside him when he saw the screen light up. When he checked the message, his eyes widened in surprise. It was an email from an unknown address. The content was as disturbing as it was unexpected. It told him to die and called him disgusting. The initial confusion gave way to alarm when he realized it wasn't just a single message. Another email, just as cruel as the first, accused him of being a violent man. When he opened his inbox, he found an endless chain of insults. All of them pointed at him, attacked him, judged him without mercy. The phone felt like it was burning in his hand. Breathing unevenly, IG could barely process what he was reading. He asked himself, without finding an answer, what the hell was going on, what all those attacks meant. He didn't understand anything. In desperation, he murmured that he hadn't done anything. Unable to endure it any longer, IG threw his phone against the floor. However, the notifications kept coming, one after another, without stopping. The next day, as he walked through the institute's hallways, IG sensed a drastic change in the atmosphere. He noticed how the other students completely ignored him, treating him as if he were invisible, or worse, as an unwelcome presence they preferred not to acknowledge. When IG reached the door of his classroom, he stopped for a moment to take a deep breath, trying to convince himself that he needed to stay calm, and that, if he acted normally, everything would be fine. However, the moment he crossed the threshold, reality hit him head-on. he immediately noticed that all of his classmates were gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves and throwing looks filled with contempt at him as he tried to make his way to his seat. Just as he was about to sit down, the sound of someone clicking their tongue in irritation startled him, forcing him to look up with a completely bewildered expression. At that instant, hostility erupted in the classroom. Voices rose against IG, and several classmates surrounded him, calling him disgusting and misogynistic, shouting demands that he disappear or simply die. Faced with such aggression, IG lowered his gaze and tried to defend himself with a trembling voice, insisting that he had done absolutely nothing of what he was being accused of. However, his attempt at self-defense only provoked even more anger. One of his female classmates slammed her hand violently on IG's desk, ordering him to shut up and calling him a criminal, while asserting with absolute certainty that a girl like Miyuki would never lie. In the face of these accusations, IG was left completely stunned when it was mentioned that even Kondo-senpai, the ace of the soccer team, had witnessed what had happened. That made it clear that, for the rest of the school, there was no doubt about whom they should believe. It was emphasized that, since they were two of the school's celebrities, the balance of truth tilted entirely in their favor. The scene ended with the girl's scornful remark, as she stated without hesitation that it was obvious everyone preferred to believe them rather than a criminal like him. Overwhelmed by the collective attack, IG felt completely crushed. His mind began to shut down, repeating to itself that he didn't want to hear any more accusation. The emotional pressure finally broke him, causing him to collapse against a desk while he desperately wondered why things had turned out this way. After that, while the rest of his classmates continued enjoying their school life and socializing normally in the classroom, IG was forced to eat lunch completely alone on a bench, submerged in deep melancholy. In the midst of that isolation, he received a notification on his phone. It was a message from the club captain informing him that activities had been suddenly cancelled and that there was no need for him to attend. This notice only deepened his sense of exclusion. As he walked among the crowd of students, IG felt completely disconnected from his surrounding, arriving at the bitter conclusion that he could no longer trust anyone in his class. Finally, searching for some way out of his situation, he began to wonder whether he could consult someone. Although he remembered that the president would be absent, he decided to try to seek help anyway. With visible nervousness, he approached a door, knocked softly, and asked for the president, clinging to the hope of being heard. However, at that very moment, he overheard his classmates admitting that they had lied to him about the day's activities. Coldly, they confessed that they had already gotten rid of the manuscript he had written. Hearing them mock his lack of talent and describe his effort as uncomfortable to watch, IG could no longer hold it in and burst into tears, deeply wounded by the humiliation. Filled with frustration, he walked through the hallways and, in a fit of rage, kicked a container, scattering papers across the floor. Among the torn and scattered remnants, fragments of his destroyed work could be seen, symbolizing the end of all his dedication. In the midst of that emotional shock, IG came to the bitter conclusion that there was no one left to support him or stand by his side. Still, as he walked gloomily, he thought that perhaps the assistant homeroom teacher, Miss Ayase, might still be in the classroom. Without hesitation, he decided to go look for her. However, he stopped abruptly when he noticed that Miyuki and her friend were already speaking with the teacher, who assumed the situation must be a misunderstanding due to Miyuki's well-known kindness. Upon hearing the teacher say that she was siding with Miyuki because she was an outstanding student, IG could not bear it any longer and ran down the hallway. Later, he stopped in front of the lockers and opened one of them. Inside, he found a note warning him that if he spoke up, they would go after his family's restaurant. The message sent a chill through his body. When he left the school, IG walked alone and in haste, while in the distance he could see Miyuki walking away with someone else. That same night, when he arrived at the restaurant, he was greeted with apparent normalcy. His mother asked him whether he hadn't had club activities that day, and IG simply explained that they had been suddenly cancelled. Upon hearing that, his mother simply smiled, while IG stated that he had ended up with an unexpected day off. Noticing that he looked a little exhausted, she suggested that, since he hadn't been feeling well lately, it might be better for him to get some rest. However, IG replied that there was no need for them to worry about him and apologized for having made them feel uneasy, especially considering that they were tired as well. Even so, both his mother and his older brother assured him that he didn't need to worry about them, and that he should simply focus on enjoying himself and attending school as usual. As he listened to those words, IG thought about his mother, and how, since his father's death, he had never seen her cry. She had always maintained a smile so as not to worry them. He also thought of his older brother, who had given everything to take care of the family and the business, taking on the role their father could no longer fulfill. With a restrained smile, IG told himself that he would have to endure everything and resolved internally to do the best he could. He believed that if he acted that way, no one would have any reason to be unhappy. However, that same night, in her room, Miyuki sat on her bed, clutching the sheets as silence filled the space. Since that day, she had been unable to fall asleep. With a tight knot in her chest, Miyuki asked herself over and over why things had to end that way. At times, she even thought that everything that had happened might have been nothing more than a bad dream. She was convinced that if Kondo-senpai hadn't been there, she would have clung to IG, telling him that she didn't want to break up with him, and would have ended up crying uncontrollably. She painfully recalled what it felt like to witness the bullying directed at IG. More than once, she felt as though she herself was about to break down in tears, but she kept telling herself that she couldn't. She had to stay strong. At the beginning, everything had been a simple love story. She was happy, even if the relationship didn't progress very far. It was then that a friend, mistakenly interpreting the situation as a problem, decided to introduce her to Kondo-senpai, assuring her that he had plenty of experience in love. Miyuki tried to reject the idea and attempted to say no, but Kondo-senpai was an exemplary student, outstanding both academically and athletically, as well as the ace of the soccer club. He was attractive, gentlemanly, and confident. She found him genuinely striking. Unlike IG, who had been her first love, Kondo-senpai had a more mature outlook on things. The blonde boy did not take long to approach her and, with a confident smile, told her that he couldn't help but feel drawn to a girl as cute as she was. He added that if he were in her situation, he wouldn't be able to resist either. Then he laughed lightly, assuring her that he was only joking. On another occasion, with a gallant tone, he offered to bring her whatever drink she wanted later, showing himself willing to attend to her attentively. He looked at her gently and confessed that he thought she was a truly charming woman. Later, in an understanding voice, he told her that perhaps her childhood friend simply felt insecure because of that, attempting to ease the guilt she was beginning to feel. As evening fell over the city, their lips met for the first time. They kissed with a restrained emotion that finally overflowed. Although confusion and doubt were reflected in her eyes, something inside her began to break. Everything she had once wanted to give to IG, Kondo did not take long to steal from her completely. Later, in a more intimate setting, Kondo shrugged and calmly told her that she shouldn't worry, that it wasn't her fault. According to him, the blame lay with IG for not having done anything with a girl as charming as she was. Miyuki looked at him while clutching the sheets, caught between guilt and resignation. Without the slightest trace of remorse, Kondo added that the real mistake was her boyfriend's, that the one who failed as a man was him. Setting that aside, Kondo mentioned that on the 30th he had no club activities and asked if she wanted to go out and have fun. With a mixture of concern and doubt, she told him that that date coincided with IG's birthday. Without lifting his eyes from his phone, Kondo replied curtly that she should forget about it, adding that otherwise he would invite another girl instead. Miyuki was left speechless. She could barely stammer as she tried to process what she had just heard. Kondo continued speaking calmly, admitting that he had noticed that he barely occupied any place in her thoughts, that she always prioritized that IG guy, and that he was starting to grow tired of constantly chasing after her. She reacted with distress, trying to stop the conversation. However, he remained firm and declared that it was time to put an end to that dysfunctional relationship, convinced that in doing so, both of them would be happier. Sometime later, standing in front of IG, she could not help but think that she had deceived herself by believing that Kondo had been the right choice. In doing so, she acknowledged to herself that she had ultimately chosen her senpai, As she covered her face with her hands, she wondered whether she would ever be able to forgive herself for the decisions she had made. She also remembered how she had spent more than 10 years alongside IG, the man she had always believed would be her life partner. She was convinced that she would eventually marry him. However, a persistent doubt lingered over her. Her most intimate self, as a woman, whispered to her whether it had truly been right to have known only IG as a man. That unease grew inside her, along with an increasingly strong need to confess the truth to everyone. She knew that she was the one who had lied, the one who had been unfaithful. Nevertheless, fear took hold of her heart. She was terrified of losing everything. Meanwhile, morning arrived at school. When IG opened his locker, he found trash, crumpled papers, and hateful messages inside. The whispers around him did not stop. Some called him disgusting. Others said they no longer wanted to speak to him. They claimed he was abusive, that Kondo senpai had done the right thing by pushing him away. Many pitied Miyuki, as if IG were the sole one to blame for everything that had happened. However, what awaited him in the classroom turned out to be an even more brutal blow. The blackboard was covered with photographs of him, cruel messages, and an arrow pointing to the location of his house. The contempt had become completely public. In one of the images, the facade of his family's restaurant could be clearly seen. As he took in that scene, IG understood the magnitude of the damage that had been caused. He realized that, because of him, his family and his father's restaurant were also being dragged into this humiliation. Shaken, IG could barely form a coherent thought. One single question repeated itself endlessly in his mind. Why did something like this have to happen to him? Unable to find an answer, he ran down the hallway, shouting that same question again and again. That was when Kondo appeared in front of him, a smile on his face. In a mocking tone, he asked IG how he felt now, calling him a criminal. Filled with rage, IG demanded to know why Kondo had told so many lies. The answer was chillingly simple. Kondo confessed that he had done it because it was fun. He told him that he had stolen his girl and that now IG had lost everything. To him, it was nothing more than a wonderful spectacle. With an even more disturbing expression, Kondo described himself as a psychopath who enjoyed ruining other people's lives. Without the slightest hesitation, he suggested that IG should drop out of school on his own. Then, not missing the chance to humiliate him even further, he told him that someone like him, someone who thought he was important, should never go near Miyuki again. Those words finally shattered IG. He collapsed to his knees, whispering that he couldn't take it anymore, until he eventually lost consciousness. A short while later, he woke up in the infirmary. The school nurse formally informed him that she would notify his guardian as a precaution. However, in a barely audible voice, IG managed to ask her not to do so. As he lay on the bed, his empty gaze drifted toward the window. In his mind, one crushing thought repeated itself over and over. No one would come to help him. Unable to stop himself, he thought of Miyuki. He was convinced that, as an exemplary student, the teachers would believe her without hesitation, far more than they would ever believe him. Despite everything that was happening, he felt he couldn't talk to his mother or his older brother. He didn't believe he was capable of asking them for help. From the moment Miyuki betrayed him, not only as his girlfriend, but also as his best friend, his world began to collapse completely. He felt finished. There was still a year and a half left before he graduated from high school, and he couldn't imagine how he would endure carrying that weight on his shoulders for so long. The notifications on his phone did not stop. Messages arrived one after another, without rest. With each insult he read, he felt worse and worse. Among them, one message came from the club president. In it, she explained that although she had considered telling him in person, the situation involving Miyuki had caused the other club members to feel frightened. For that reason, and with words wrapped in apologies, she asked him to stop attending the club. IG's reaction was immediate. He couldn't accept it. With tears in his eyes, he kept telling himself that he hadn't done any of the things he was being accused of. His anguish deepened completely when he saw that the president had blocked him on the app. Shortly afterward, another notification informed him that that friend could no longer receive outfit change gifts and suggested that he choose someone else. Finally, overwhelmed by everything that had happened, IG could no longer hold it in and broke down into deep, uncontrollable sobs. Despite everything that had happened, The next day, IG approached his teacher. With an apparently calm expression, he told her that he was feeling better. She, visibly surprised by his attitude, asked if that was truly the case and kindly urged him to take good care of himself. After that brief interaction, IG slowly walked down the school hallway. When he reached the stairs, he decided to sit for a moment. For now, he needed to adapt. He had to, at least until his heart could get used to the cruelty of others. He sat alone, hunched over on the steps, clinging to the thought that if he could just endure it, maybe everything could go on. Still, insults and cruel words began to surface in his mind. They were memories, internalized thoughts that resurfaced over and over again. IG remained silent, receiving all that hatred without offering any response. Later, he was sitting at the rooftop entrance. In the midst of the silence, a terrifying possibility crossed his mind. Maybe it would be easier to end it all by simply jumping from there. Just as he seemed on the verge of giving up, when he opened the door, he came across a girl. They looked at each other in silence. An emotionally heavy moment passed between them. On the edge of despair, with no place left to escape, the girl appeared before him on the rooftop, wearing a calm and resolute expression. At that moment, IG realized he had met someone who might, just maybe, change the course of his fate. She watched him seriously, trying to figure out who he was. IG explained that he had been wandering the school, skipping classes, and had ended up there without much thought. Then he introduced himself as IG Yahello, a second-year student. As he looked up at the sky, he thought to himself that he couldn't admit the real reason he had gone there. He couldn't say he had intended to jump. The girl reacted with surprise as she recognized him. She soon realized he was Ayano-senpai. She then formally introduced herself as Ai Ikiju, a prodigious student who had earned the top score in the entrance exams the previous year. Due to her kindness and beauty, she had quickly become the school's idol from the moment she enrolled. It was said that several classmates had already confessed their feelings to her, but she had rejected them all. Still, the reason behind her refusals wasn't entirely clear. Ikiju felt a slight annoyance as she wondered why she had to run into him at that particular moment. IG, a bit embarrassed, acknowledged that she probably knew about the rumors surrounding him. He then asked if she would let him stay there, explaining that he just wanted to hide away until lunchtime so he could eat alone for a while. However, Ikiju firmly responded with a no. She made it clear that this was her place and added, with some annoyance, that he should disappear and find somewhere else. IG, surprised by the harshness of her words, asked if she was really being serious and once again assumed that she was aware of the rumors. Ikiju confirmed that yes, she knew about them. When IG tried once more to ask if he could stay, Ikiju abruptly interrupted him, making it clear she had no intention of letting him remain. IG was left completely stunned by the force of her refusal. After a few tense seconds, Ikiju, now calmer, clarified that yes, she knew about the rumors, but that they were just that, rumors. From a distance, tension lingered between them. Ikiju stood with her arms crossed, annoyed, looking away. Then she explained that she couldn't accept something as truth unless she had seen it for herself. IG understood, deep down, that everything surrounding him was just hearsay. Echoing around him were the thoughts of others, voices questioning why one should believe one-sided accusations, voices comparing love to an illness, or saying that the situation was spiraling out of control, and that the student's reaction had been too extreme. From the shadows of his mind came the certainty that it was cruel to condemn someone without knowing the truth. Looking down, IG wondered if she believed him. Ikiju answered seriously that it wasn't about believing him or not. She explained with conviction that hurting someone based solely on bias, one-sided information was far too great a risk. Then she turned with a calm expression. In IG's eyes, a suppressed emotion shimmered. The sky, now clear, began to glow with the morning sun. IG smiled, relieved and grateful, and sincerely thanked her. Ikiju, however, reacted with confusion. She didn't understand why he was thanking her, nor what was truly going on with him. In the end, she remained silent, surprised by that unexpected gesture. IG smiles kindly and says that it's okay if she doesn't understand. However, at that moment, a few drops begin to fall, and little by little, the rain becomes present. Then, IG notices her with surprise as both remain face to face under the rain on the rooftop. Given the situation, IG suggests going back inside since they might catch a cold. Nonetheless, Ikiju turns around and asks him to leave her alone, which causes IG to react in confusion. Ikiju then shows a frustrated and emotionally charged expression and, completely soaked, screams through tears that she still doesn't understand why she's there alone. With evident concern, IG asks what the reason is. However, Ikiju responds coldly, downplaying both being wet and the possibility of catching a cold. Then, with tears in her eyes, she confesses that for her, tomorrow will never come, leaving IG completely shocked by her words. Immediately after, IG steps toward her and asks her to calm down, but Ikiju, emotionally broken, yells at him to leave her alone and, without holding back, expresses that she wants to die. At once, IG grabs her tightly and begs her to stop, shouting that it's enough. Ikiju tries to break free, loses control, and, losing her balance, her face fills with surprise. They both fall hard to the ground, slipping over the wet surface. Still on the ground, Ikiju, worried, demands why he's trying to protect her and points out that, if the railing had been in bad condition, he could have been hurt too. IG, insistent, repeats the question of why, until he finally shouts that there doesn't need to be a reason to help someone. Ikiju reflects and begins to say that if someone is going to kill themselves, they should at least do it in a certain way, which leaves IG completely stunned. Suddenly, IG shouts that they should go out together that day and skip class. Ikiju reacts completely confused and, still soaked, looks at him without understanding, wondering what else she's supposed to do. Then she takes a few steps away while IG remains sitting on the ground, exhausted. Ikiju says he should realize the situation they're in and brings up the idea of skipping class. In response, IG, with a tired but sincere smile, confesses that he came there thinking of ending his life and never imagined he'd end up trying to stop a kuhai. Ikiju is surprised by the confession, lowers her gaze, and her lips tremble. Both remain seated on the rooftop floor, face to face, under the rain. Finally, Ikiju breaks down emotionally, smiles through her tears, and acknowledges that it's true, while IG smiles softly without replying. And so, both continue sitting on the rooftop, smiling faintly as the rain keeps falling, creating a calmer atmosphere. Later, Ikiju stands next to the rooftop door, thoughtful. Then, IG gets up with effort, picks up his backpack, and suggests going back inside, to which Ikiju looks at him with a calm expression and says he's right. However, before leaving, the protagonist pulls something from his bag and, handing her a towel, tells her to use it for now. Ikiju accepts with a slight nod, indicating it's okay, while IG reacts awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Ikiju, still wet, looks at the object in surprise and quietly says thank you. Then they stand face to face. At that moment, IG covers his face in embarrassment, asking her not to look at him so much. In response, Ikiju, blushing and annoyed, raises her voice to make it clear that she already knew. Then, Ikiju holds the soaked towel in her hands, looking down with a thoughtful and vulnerable expression. Her eyes are serious and deep, showing she is deeply reflecting. Noticing that she's being watched, Ikiju points at him in reproach, stating that it's inappropriate, so IG looks away and apologizes, deeply embarrassed. Then, Ikiju asks what they'll do now and, with a soft smile, reminds him that he invited her to skip class, assuming he had some kind of plan. IG looks at her with a tired smile, closes his eyes, and smiles awkwardly as he confesses that he didn't have any plan, and that he was just desperate. Ikiju looks at him with curiosity while the protagonist comments that being a troubled guy isn't cool at all. Ikiju responds with her eyes closed and a big smile, saying that's true. IG looks at her in surprise, wondering to himself if that's how she used to laugh. Then he remembers what he had heard from some classmates who had confessed to her. In that flashback, Ikiju, with a serious expression, asks why he thought he could date someone he didn't even know. Sincerely, she admits that she feels afraid and that she understands what it means to receive a confession from someone who is almost a stranger. Then, she remembered an unpleasant encounter she had once had with a boy, in which she, with a serious expression, pointed out that in the end he only seemed interested in her appearance and her status. The boy in front of her watched her in silence as she walked away with firm steps. As she moved on, she told herself that it had completely shattered him, according to the testimony that boy gave some time later. Returning to the present, IG looked at Ikiju with surprise and confusion, since he had thought that she would insult his proposal. However, her response had been completely unexpected. At that moment, Ikiju took something out of her pocket and handed it to the protagonist, explaining that it was part of her gratitude. In response, IG, visibly nervous, could only utter a simple "thank you." Then, still blushing, IG proceeded to look for the onigiri he had inside his bag and, once he found it, handed it to Ikiju, telling her to try it because it was really good. After taking a bite, Ikiju reacted excitedly, stating that it was delicious, her eyes shining with surprise. Shortly afterward, she was surprised to recognize the flavor and confirm that it was tuna with mayonnaise. IG replied with a smile, enthusiastically explaining that it was a classic from convenience stores. Ikiju held the onigiri in front of her face, deeply moved, while reflecting that everyone had been eating things like this. Even so, she kept thinking about how delicious it was. Then, IG smiled kindly and told her that there were many other tasty things as well, and that it would be a shame not to get to know them. Upon hearing these words, Ikiju looked at him, touched, with a gentle expression and a faint blush on her cheeks. Ikiju reacted excitedly as she continued eating, and once again expressed that it was delicious. Without stopping, she added that now she really was interested. In response, IG, smiling, suggested going to his house. At that proposal, Ikiju came to an abrupt stop, completely flushed and in shock. Shortly after, the two of them began walking together toward the exit. IG moved forward decisively and said that it was fine, that they should go. However, Ikiju showed concern as she pointed out that the main entrance was locked and asked how they were supposed to get out. IG replied with a serious expression that they would climb, which caused Ikiju to panic as she remembered that she was wearing a skirt. At this, IG smiled and clarified that it was just a joke, and that he knew that, then explained that there was an iron door next to the main entrance. That door functioned as a service entrance that could be opened from the inside and would lock automatically when closed, preventing entry from outside but making it easy to exit. Annoyed, Ikiju wondered how he knew that. For his part, IG thought to himself that an exemplary student probably wouldn't know. Then, confidently, he commented that it was fine to do things like that once in a while. He smiled and invited her to come along, and the two of them started walking. Suddenly, Ikiju took IG's hand, causing him to become completely flushed. Ikiju asked him seriously why he was blushing, and IG, nervous, asked her to walk faster. As she watched him, Ikiju wondered whether it was okay to hold hands with a boy she had just met. At that moment, they both stopped. Ikiju reflected out loud that it would be a lie to say it didn't make her uncomfortable, but that in situations like that, it was normal for couples to hold hands. IG remained silent. Then, Ikiju mentioned that it was the first time she had ever held a boy's hand and asked him to take good care of it. Immediately afterward, she smiled confidently and encouraged him to keep moving forward. IG thought that, in the end, the one who ended up feeling embarrassed was him. Suddenly, someone surprised them and asked what they were doing. Ikiju smiled and thought that they were moving forward without looking back. IG also smiled and felt that the two of them were facing the future as if they were definitively breaking away from the past. However, Ikiju couldn't understand what was happening. A sudden doubt had begun to make its way into her mind, with no clear answer in sight. She couldn't comprehend why she was running away from school with someone she had barely met that very same day. Amidst that confusion, memories surfaced of the times when other boys had promised to protect her. Words repeated over and over again that now only managed to irritate her. As she reflected in silence, she realized that those phrases touched a wound she preferred never to feel again, because it wasn't protection that she needed. She had been hurt before, and because of that, trust had become impossible. However, when she recalled the incident with IG, something in that logic began to crack, because Ayano-senpai had been different. Ikiju watched him carefully. His kindness was so evident that it made her uncomfortable. When she looked at their interlaced hands, she noticed how a lingering doubt remained, but at the same time, something stronger was beginning to take shape inside her. She thought that, if she was with him, maybe she would find a way out. Maybe she could escape that hell she was living in. Meanwhile, a young man appeared, carrying himself with evident confidence and arrogance. His name was Kondo, and he claimed to be the man at the center of that world, boasting about having entered one of the top 3 high schools in the state. With pride, he mentioned that his father was a city councilman. He also recalled how, thanks to soccer, he had led a weak team to a national tournament, becoming its star, and how even a prestigious university club had recruited him for his talent. Since childhood, Kondo had been the best at everything: academics, height, performance. He claimed his talent made him the pillar of any group. Additionally, since elementary school, he had been popular with girls, and since his first girlfriend in 3rd grade, he had never lacked romantic partners. One relationship from middle school stood out in his memory: an otaku and the most popular girl in the class, who had been dating since childhood, as if destined to marry. To many, it seemed like an incredibly pure and sweet relationship. However, according to Kondo, and as he expected, the girl eventually fell in love with him. She herself said that being with that boy had been the greatest shame of her life. She openly despised him and claimed that otaku made her sick. Kondo thought she was a fool, someone who saw herself as the heroine of a tragedy. He mocked her shamelessly, saying that the shame she spoke of was actually laughable. He recalled how they recorded the girl speaking badly about the boy, and then made him listen to the recording. For Kondo, it was unforgettable. The boy, completely shattered, screamed through tears and reminded her of a promise. He told her she had promised to marry him. That moment, for Kondo, was when his desire for domination was fulfilled, and it made him feel incredible. The girl, even in that state, said she was happy with Kondo and begged the other boy to leave. Kondo thought she was overdramatic. It was then that he discovered he enjoyed getting involved with other people's girlfriends. He noticed that when he entangled with them, those girls lost their way, they stopped studying, their performance dropped. Even if they had been childhood sweethearts, they couldn't understand even basic things. Later, when they entered high school, he was the one who ended the relationship. The girl screamed in desperation, unable to understand why. She cried uncontrollably, asking why he wanted to break up, saying she had given up everything for him. But Kondo watched her expressionlessly. Then, with coldness, he replied that he hated easy girls. She looked at him trembling, with a broken smile and her face full of tears. He concluded that if he hated her, then everything was over. Just like that. That same girl, who had once been so admired, was now shunned in class. She stopped attending school and ended up with a sad fate. Kondo told the story mockingly, smiling with a twisted expression. For him, the best thing was to watch all of it and laugh. He believed that both men and women were the same, and seeing how they ruined their lives wasn't something that bothered him, it entertained him. At that point, he recalled the moment he met Miyuki. From that instant, he decided she would be the next one. He began to treat her badly, revealing his true nature, and hurt her as part of the plan. He even exposed her in front of others, showing them what she had done. And while he blamed IG for what he had actually done himself, someone else posted a photo. The image clearly showed a bruise on Miyuki's arm. The message was direct: she was the victim, and the culprit was none other than IG Ayano. Faced with that situation, Kondo smiled maliciously, thinking it would be worth seeing just how far they could fall. Back in the present, Miyuki, visibly worried, noticed that IG hadn't returned since that morning. Uneasily, she watched some classmates erasing messages written on IG's desk, clear evidence of bullying or defamation. From her seat, guilt began to rise within her. She feared that, perhaps because of her, he might end up leaving school. Terrified, she couldn't believe that Kondo-senpai had been capable of spreading such a rumor. Meanwhile, Kondo smiled with satisfaction. She tried to calm herself, repeating that she didn't know anything, that maybe it wasn't that serious. However, even though she tried to convince herself she bore no responsibility, her agitation was obvious. That's when, looking out the window, she saw something that stunned her. There was IG. The moment she recognized him, she couldn't help but shout his name. She had seen him clearly. He was running, holding Ikaju's hand. The two of them were escaping together. The image of their interlocked hands made the connection between them unmistakably clear. Miyuki, in shock, couldn't comprehend what was happening. Her expression began to contort until she finally screamed, unable to hold back. A single word began to echo in her mind. She kept asking herself why. Emotionally shattered and out of control, her eyes wild, she demanded to know who that girl was, that homewrecker cat. From that same window, a teacher silently watched the two teenagers running away. With a calm expression, he commented that they had done something crazy, but that he was glad to see them looking well. That teacher was Takayanagi, the homeroom teacher of Class 2B. Shortly before the incident, during that morning's homeroom period, Mr. Takayanagi stood in front of the class. With composure, he announced the beginning of the second semester. The classroom remained completely silent as the students listened attentively. Before starting the lesson, he said he would take attendance. He began by calling a student, and Ada responded firmly, "Present." Then he called the name Iga Ono, but received no response. What he saw next deeply disturbed him. Iji's desk was covered in scratches and insults. The damage was obvious, and Takayanagi immediately understood the seriousness of what was happening. He asked if anyone knew Iji's whereabouts, and a student replied that Igi had felt unwell and gone to the nurse's office. Upon hearing that, the teacher instructed the class to head to the gym for the next activity, while he would go look for Ig himself. However, before leaving the classroom, his gaze fell on Miyuki Yamada, who was showing clear signs of nervousness, sweating in her seat and avoiding all eye contact. Just then, Nurse Mitsui burst into the classroom, looking for Mr. Takayanagi. She apologized for the interruption and, without delay, asked whether Ig had returned. After receiving a negative answer, she explained with concern that Ig had been acting strangely. He had told her he just felt unwell and needed to rest a bit, but she had sensed something different in his demeanor. Still, she hadn't stopped him, and now she was worried about his well-being. She shouted that she would search the school immediately. Takayanagi thanked her for the information. He then thought that, since the principal was attending the General Assembly, he would first speak with the vice principal. Upon hearing the report, the vice principal grasped the urgency of the matter, though he also recalled that the principal was unavailable at the moment. Therefore, he asked the teacher to investigate the events in more detail by speaking directly with the students. He also suggested convening a meeting that very day to take the necessary measures. Takayanagi agreed without hesitation. With a serious demeanor, he returned to the classroom and asked the students if they understood the meaning of damaging school property. Upon hearing his words, the room fell into a heavy silence, as the students began to understand the gravity of the situation. The teacher then showed Ig's vandalized desk and explained that, due to what had happened, a full investigation would be conducted. The atmosphere grew tense. The pressure became increasingly palpable. One of the students, visibly nervous, said they didn't know who the culprit was. Then, Takayanagi, in a firm and clear voice, stated that, based on the words written and Ig Ayano's emotional state, it was possible to imagine what had occurred. He also reminded them that desks were school property, paid for with their parents' taxes, and that damaging them wasn't a game. It was a serious offense. At that moment, Amada lowered her gaze. The pressure was beginning to show on her clearly. Professor Takayanagi anticipated the possible excuses. He imagined that the culprit might claim it hadn't been done seriously, or might even try to blame Ayano himself. However, he was emphatic in making it clear that no one had the right to write slander on someone else's property. Even in more serious situations, such as threats, those kinds of justifications were unacceptable. The atmosphere in the classroom grew increasingly heavy. The students began to feel singled out. With a firm gaze, Takayanagi spoke plainly. They should not deceive themselves with terms like school bullying, nor should they think that what had happened was merely a joke or a harmless prank. What had occurred was a crime, one that could not and should not be ignored. For that reason, he asked them to remember it well. 30 minutes earlier, an emergency meeting had been convened with several teachers. In the meeting room, a sign clearly indicated the reason for the gathering. The vice principal and the principal entered. The latter still held his phone in his hand, apologized for the delay, and immediately took the floor. He thanked Takayanagi for reporting the situation so quickly and stated seriously that there was nothing more urgent in an educational institution than addressing a negative situation in a timely manner. Even so, Takayanagi did not absolve himself of responsibility. He believed that perhaps the way he had structured his classes might have influenced things in some way. At that moment, all he felt was regret. Then another teacher spoke up. It was EY, who remarked that as educators there were always reasons to reflect, but that in this case Takayanagi had done everything within his power. Unlike others who tended to change their narrative or look the other way, he had been transparent from the very beginning. The principal agreed with that assessment, stating that EY was right. He added that instead of focusing on what had already happened, they needed to concentrate on the present and on what was still to come. At that point, he asked whether anyone knew how IG was doing. EY replied that Takayanagi had spoken with several students and that he himself had taken responsibility for calling the students' parents. In a later scene, IG's mother was shown speaking with Professor EY. She explained that her son had told her he felt unwell and that was why he had left school. She simply wanted to know whether he was doing better. Apparently, IG had made it home without any trouble. Upon hearing this, the principal expressed his relief and took the opportunity to share what he had previously discussed with the vice principal. He spoke firmly, from that moment on, IG Ayano would be everyone's priority. The worst possible outcome would be for him to start missing school or decide to drop out, so it was essential to stay close to him. With conviction, Takayanagi replied that he would do so. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the school, Sayaka was talking with Kondo. She asked him if he wanted to go to her house, and he answered yes. She then told him she would wait for him. However, the conversation was abruptly interrupted when several students burst into the room, shouting urgently. They called out to Kondo Senpai, announcing that there was a serious problem. One of the students, visibly nervous, began to confess what had happened. He claimed they had only wanted to mess with IG Ayano, so they decided to vandalize his desk. However, everything had spiraled out of control when Takayanagi began investigating the incident as if it were a criminal case. Kondo frowned, irritated. He thought everything was happening faster than expected and mentally cursed the teacher, having assumed he would be someone willing to cover things up. He had been wrong. Still, he believed it didn't matter much, because if things got out of hand, his father would take care of everything. He spoke as if only he mattered, while his followers watched him in awe. One of them tried to speak, asking him not to be so cold and reminding him that they had done it for his sake. But Kondo, showing no emotion at all, replied seriously. He asked them when he had ever told them to do that. The aggressors didn't know what to say. They remained silent, unable to justify their action. Kondo maintained his composure, unshaken. He reminded them that he had merely mentioned having a problem, and that it was they who had acted on their own, damaging school property. One of the students tried to justify what had happened, but Kondo cut him off without hesitation. He warned them that if they had truly done that, they would have to pretend with all their might, since it wasn't as if there were any evidence, though if there was, then they were finished. His eyes gleamed with a calculating, satisfied expression. Silently, he thought that he had obtained exactly what he wanted. Now he had 2 more slaves under his control. Meanwhile, IG and Ikiju were resting on a bench in the park. Both of them were breathing heavily, exhausted after running so much. IG, visibly concerned, asked her if she was okay, to which Ikiju, still panting and slightly embarrassed, replied that she was, although she had to admit that keeping up with a boy's pace had been really difficult. IG gave a tired smile, thinking it was surprising she had managed to keep up with him. Then, scenes from the past flashed through his mind. He remembered the rumors saying that although Ikiju had been accepted into several clubs, she ended up rejecting all of them. Sometimes people asked her for help, and on certain occasions, she acted like the star, although that was just something he had heard from others. Because of all that, he expected no less from someone who excelled both academically and athletically. A little later, IG stood up from the bench, announcing that it was time to go. Ikiju stopped abruptly and called out to him in a serious tone, annoyed and blushing. She felt he teased her too much. or explained things in a confusing way, or perhaps he did it on purpose. IG, with a mischievous smile, replied that it was probably the first option. She looked at him with a tense smile, calling him a liar. Then, the two began walking together down the street in silence. The atmosphere was calm. Before long, they arrived at IG's family restaurant. Without hesitation, he walked in naturally, loudly announcing that he was back. His mother welcomed him with a smile, casually commenting that he had come home early, and teasingly asked if he had skipped class. "Not bad," she said playfully. IG, with a nervous smile, explained that he was actually feeling unwell, so he had decided to head back early. He also mentioned that he had seen a kuhai who would be leaving early, and that he had invited her to lunch. Ikiju, meanwhile, was attentively observing the inside of the restaurant. It was her first time there. The place wasn't just IG's home, it was also a Western-style restaurant. His father, now deceased, had been the head chef. It was known that he had trained at a well-known hotel, saved up for years, and that after starting to run the place, he had fallen in love with IG's mother. Later, the two decided to open the restaurant together. Currently, IG's older brother, who had graduated from a culinary school, was the one in charge of the kitchen as their father's successor. Meanwhile, their mother handled the accounting and customer service. With a warm smile, the mother warned them that the place would soon get busy, so she told them to use the room in the back. She kindly said that the house welcomed them. IG smiled broadly in appreciation and opened the door, inviting Ikiju to come in. She peeked in shyly, clearly nervous but also curious. As she entered, she introduced herself formally, visibly blushing. She said she was Ayano Senpai's kuhai, and that he always helped her. Then she apologized for the sudden visit. IG's mother and brother looked at her in surprise. Their reactions were noticeably exaggerated. His mother, covering her mouth in delight, commented that she didn't expect IG to bring such a cute girl home. She said he had really taken them by surprise. His brother nodded in agreement, not taking his eyes off her. With warmth, the mother invited them to relax and eat as much as they wanted. They made their way to the table, and the atmosphere began to grow cozy and welcoming. IG crouched down slightly and whispered a nice to himself. While in the background, a shelf full of books and organized boxes could be seen. From the doorway, still smiling, his mother told Ikiju to make herself at home. She responded with a kind smile, thanking her enthusiastically. On the table, a menu displayed dishes such as omurice and katsu curry. Ikiju, curious, asked if there was anything IG would recommend. He pointed at the menu and suggested the special lunch, whose main dish was, in fact, the omurice. She reacted with excitement, saying it looked delicious. Seeing her enthusiasm, IG smiled with his eyes closed, clearly happy. Later, upon returning, Ikiju mentioned that she had already placed the order. She also apologized because the table they had gotten was a bit dim. In response, Ikiju, with a calm smile, said it wasn't a problem at all. On the contrary, she found it to be a curious experience. She explained that neither in her home nor in the apartment where she currently lived did she have a Japanese-style room. IG, for his part, explained that this space served as a resting room for both his mother and his brother, though it was filled with their respective hobbies. As Ikiju looked around, she began to understand why the place felt so warm. Then, with a nostalgic expression, she commented that it made her feel a little envious. She said that the colors of the family could be seen in that house in a very special way, and that, once upon a time, her own home had also been like that. At that moment, IG's mother entered with a cheerful smile, bringing the special lunch. Ikiju watched with surprise and excitement. The ever-joyful mother added that after the meal, they could choose between tea or coffee on the house. Ikiju chose tea, and the mother, delighted, celebrated the fact that Ikiju liked it too, saying it made her really happy, because she loved tea as well. Meanwhile, IG watched them silently, smiling gently. He thought to himself that his mother's reaction didn't surprise him at all, knowing how much she enjoyed tea. Soon after, both were seated with their lunch in front of them. IG's mother wished them a good meal and told them she'd bring the tea once they were done eating. He nodded, while Ikiju got ready to begin. Sitting in front of the TV, they both said at the same time, "Thanks for the food." They started eating cheerfully, enthusiastically using their chopsticks. As he ate, IG reflected with a calm expression. Not long ago, both of them had been thinking only about dying. And now, here they were, sharing a meal. Ikeju took her first bite and said it was delicious. She kept eating, deeply enjoying every flavor. Before long, her eyes filled with tears. Both of them smiled sincerely as they shared that moment, wrapped in a peaceful and happy atmosphere. Ikeju held her food tray and smiled softly as she enjoyed each bite, making it clear that everything tasted truly delicious to her. In fact, that tanjiro soup brought her an unexpected sense of calm. Meanwhile, IG reacted with quiet understanding, and then explained that there was a reason for that feeling. It was one of his father's special recipes. He told her that his father used to prepare a large pot with plenty of vegetables and onion, and that although the seasoning used miso and very little salt, the flavor always turned out rich and pleasant. As he said this, IG smiled with discreet pride, inwardly surprised at how naturally he could speak well of his father, as if in that moment he could hold that memory without it hurting as much. Ikeju stayed silent for a moment, taking in his explanation, and little by little her surprise shifted into a shy discomfort as she wondered whether she had been careless. However, IG raised his hands with a smile, making it clear there was nothing to apologize for. On the contrary, he was glad that she recognized the flavor as a compliment to his father. Then Ikeju lowered her gaze with a nostalgic warmth, and her expression softened as she realized that behind that dish there was something more than just a recipe. As if the soup itself spoke to her of a kind person. In silence, that thought repeated itself in her mind with a faint blush, while IG, scratching the back of his neck, told her he was really happy she liked it. She smiled again, feeling glad to have tasted such delicious tanjiro, and IG, with complete confidence, offered to serve her more. However, that light-hearted mood shifted when Ikeju suddenly grew serious, and a heavy doubt appeared in her voice, as if she needed to confirm whether it had truly been all right for her to come to his home. Next, she admitted that she had been worried for a long time, and the narration moved into her memory, back to the moment when her hands had pushed the door to the rooftop open. There, standing with her back turned and looking at the sky, she had felt she had finally made a decision. Even so, that certainty fractured inside her, because something within her had stopped just before she could take the next step. The memory became clearer when she returned to the scene where she had fallen and IG had caught her after reaching her. At that point, Ikeju acknowledged honestly that he had saved her, though it had also put him at risk. Then, in the present, she looked down at her plate, linking that memory with the simple fact of being there, eating a warm and delicious meal, and that mixture stirred her heart. Holding back tears, she admitted she was no longer sure of her decision, as if life had quietly shifted the ground beneath her feet. Seeing her like that, IG admitted he didn't know what Ikeju had gone through, and for that reason he felt that anything he said might sound shallow or misplaced. He recognized how sudden it was to talk about this, and yet when his words came out, they did so with steady clarity. He said that the fact that she had been in that place was the reason he had been saved, and spoken so plainly, those words went straight to Ikeju's heart. IG looked forward with determination and let out his wish with a quiet strength, wanting her to keep living. In that moment, Ikeju broke down and cried with a pain she could no longer hold in silence. Meanwhile, the protagonist, seeing her so dignified even in her tears, felt he was witnessing something true, as if he were finally seeing the real Ikeju. Soon after, IG's mother entered the room with a cup of tea on a small plate, and with gentle kindness apologized for the wait as she offered it. Ikeju remained seated, catching her breath and settling her emotions, but she managed to respond with a warm, grateful smile. IG watched her with relief, noticing she seemed a little calmer. His mother, naturally enthusiastic, said she was glad to see her and explained that this was the tea she liked the most, with an aroma similar to wine but without alcohol. Therefore, there was no problem with Ikeju drinking it. As she spoke, she showed a small container of sugar cubes and commented that the tea was very good on its own, but that with sugar it could make you feel especially cheerful. Finally, Ikeju brought the cup to her lips and took a delicate sip. Upon tasting it, her face lit up with a sincere smile as she said it was delicious. With the cup between her hands, Ikeju described the rich aroma, and acknowledged that with sugar, the flavor became truly pleasant. Immediately, IG's mother leaned in even more, excited by her reaction, and with complete naturalness asked her what kind of tea she liked. Ikiju responded enthusiastically that her favorite was Darjeeling, and upon hearing that, IG's mother was delighted with spontaneous joy, saying it was her favorite as well. Then Ikiju added, a bit shyly, that she had been drinking Japanese black tea lately, and that made IG's mother even more enthusiastic, as she began talking about a shop she could recommend. In the background, IG watched the two of them with a calm smile, as if that light conversation had opened a window of peace. Then IG's mother, with a warmth that required no effort, told Ikiju that she was truly happy, and that, to her, it felt as though she had a daughter. After that, she added with the same affectionate tone that she not only hoped Ikiju would grow close to IG, but also wanted her to be her friend. Those words left Ikiju surprised, and even with tears of happiness held back, she responded that of course. A little later, Ikiju began to stand, feeling it was time to leave. IG stood as well and said he would walk her to the station. However, she gently stopped him, assuring him he didn't need to worry. Even so, she confessed with a faint blush that she had enjoyed herself so much that she felt a quiet sadness at having to go. IG looked at her in silence, with a concern he didn't know how to manage. Once outside, IG continued watching her with that same careful attention, and Ikiju met his gaze with steady eyes, as if wanting to reassure him, repeating that he shouldn't worry. Then, with a new sense of serenity, she began to put into words what had changed inside her. Because after meeting him, she felt she now had a reason to stay here. IG was taken aback by her words and couldn't help but smile as he looked at her. Before they separated completely, Ikiju called out to him timidly, and IG turned his head to listen. She, standing with her back to him, sought a confirmation that mattered more to her than she wished to admit, asking him if they were truly friends. IG answered with a clear smile, saying yes. Then Ikiju smiled with open joy, saying it made her very happy and that she hoped they would get along well. The urban scenery grew quiet as she walked alone, and the thought crossed her mind that those 2 hours might have been the most enjoyable of her life. Even so, a restrained sadness curved her lips, and she lowered her gaze with a slight blush, accepting to herself that for now, it was best to remain friends. At that moment, the sound of a car stopping reached her, and a formal driver appeared beside a vehicle with the door open, saying he had come to pick her up. Ikiju's eyes dimmed for an instant, and even so she stepped forward politely, thanking him seriously before getting in. Back at IG's family restaurant, he entered the house feeling defeated, and the door closed behind him with a heavy silence. As soon as he was alone, his body began to tremble and a cold sweat ran over his skin, as if the emotional impact he had been holding back had finally caught up to him. His face darkened as he told himself that he had been fine just moments ago, but now he couldn't stop shaking. Then he covered his face, desperate, and a question spun inside him about what he was supposed to do starting tomorrow. After that, he curled up against the wall and cried silently. His mind took him back to school, where he imagined students laughing at him, until he could only expect the worst. The image of himself sitting alone in an empty classroom left him completely crushed. Yet in the middle of that darkness, the memory of Ikiju smiling warmly appeared, and IG recognized that only while talking to her had he been able to forget that suffering. He also understood, with a painful tenderness, that she had no idea how much she had saved him. Then, while he was still on the floor of his room, IG's phone began to ring, and the sound jolted him. He looked at the screen with a dim expression, assuming it must be another message from some disposable account. However, when he picked up the phone, he saw a very familiar name. On the screen was an earlier message from Imai Satoshi, saying that starting the next day he would do his best. Below it, though, there was a new message asking if IG was okay and apologizing because his own phone had broken during a trip. IG was left speechless. Immediately, a memory cut through him with nostalgia. He saw himself as a child alongside two friends, Satoshi and Miyuki, the three of them laughing together. With that emotion trembling in his chest, he wrote a brief reply, saying he was doing more or less fine. IG's reaction was intense, as if a spark had ignited the air, and the tension showed on his face. Satoshi quickly replied, saying he was glad to hear it and suggesting they meet right then, at their usual restaurant. IG stared at the screen with a complicated expression, and in the darkness of his room, he remembered how many club members had turned their backs on him, something Satoshi probably couldn't fully grasp. Even so, he also remembered that Satoshi had never stopped treating him kindly, just as he always had, and that alone made IG feel a small but genuine happiness. With that hope, he sent a message accepting, saying it sounded good to him. When he arrived at the restaurant, Satoshi called to him from afar, raising his hand, and IG walked toward him. Satoshi smiled, saying he had arrived very quickly, and IG answered with a simple yes. Then Satoshi's tone grew serious, as if he understood that this was a critical moment for his friend, and IG felt that, just as he imagined, Satoshi already knew quite a few things. Without hesitation, Satoshi bowed deeply to apologize, saying he was truly sorry for not realizing what IG had been going through. He added that he had failed as a friend and insisted on asking for forgiveness. Overwhelmed, IG could barely say his name. Then Satoshi checked his phone and showed that he had seen the unpleasant rumors that had been spreading about IG. He explained that he hardly used social media, and that was why he hadn't known sooner. He also pointed out that they had ended up in different classes at the start of their second year. On top of that, the club had gone on a trip, and only now had he learned about everything. With guilt and frustration, he admitted he was only giving excuses and that what mattered was that right now, the one suffering was IG, and he hadn't been there when he should have been. For that reason, Satoshi apologized again with sincerity. IG lowered his gaze and let out a question that weighed heavily on him, wanting to know whether Satoshi believed him. Satoshi responded with calm confidence, saying yes, and that the moment he saw it, he knew it was a lie. He recalled that one of his friends had shown him the posts and added that he had known IG forever, so he knew IG wasn't someone who would hurt others. Then he pointed out that the person being talked about was Miyuki and said, with steady seriousness, that he was sure there had been a mistake. He also mentioned that Professor Takeyanagi was very worried and told IG that he had gone to ask what was happening. In his memory, Satoshi appeared nervously questioning other classmates about what had happened to IG, and someone replied that apparently he had gone home early. Then another student, whose face wasn't clearly shown, mentioned that a lot of rumors about IG were circulating. Satoshi listened in silence, frustrated inside, and still thanked them politely. After that, Satoshi walked down the hallway with an alert gaze, urgently looking for someone. Peering from behind a wall, he saw Professor Takeyanagi walk by with a serious stride. He recognized him instantly and felt that at last he had found the right person. He stepped out immediately to call him. The professor stopped upon hearing his voice, and with a firm expression wanted to know what was going on. Satoshi explained that he had heard IG had gone home early, and as he spoke, he thought that if the professor dared to look the other way, he wouldn't hesitate to punch him. However, the professor's reaction was unexpectedly direct. He stepped forward with an urgency that was almost pleading and revealed how worried he was about IG Ayano, asking that if Satoshi knew even a little, he should tell him without holding anything back. Satoshi was taken aback by that frankness, and when the professor lowered his head slightly, he admitted that he had also only learned about the situation that very morning. He explained that he was investigating what had happened, but he couldn't gather any clear information, and because of that, he was uneasy. In the hallway, both of them grew tense, and Takeyanagi pointed out that Satoshi had been IG's childhood friend, so he asked if he had heard anything. Satoshi kept a serious expression while the professor looked even sterner. And realizing the gravity of the situation, Satoshi lowered his gaze, accepting that the matter was deeper than he had imagined. Then he looked back at the professor with resolve and acknowledged that he himself had only found out very recently, yet assured him he would tell him everything he knew. He then took out his phone and showed the professor the unpleasant messages that had been posted about IG, and Takeyanagi looked at the screen with evident concern. Satoshi grew worked up as he spoke, defending IG insistently, and making it absolutely clear that he wasn't that kind of person, and that nothing being said matched who he was. The professor, gradually regaining his composure, thanked him for telling him and asked that if possible, he say something to IG. Takayanagi explained that perhaps IG was afraid, but he wanted him to trust the adults, and he promised he would resolve the issue without fail. With a very serious expression, he emphasized that even a little was enough. He just needed IG to believe in them. Satoshi returned to the present as he remembered those words and passed them on to IG exactly as he had heard them. Upon receiving them, IG could no longer hold himself together and began to cry. He then lowered his head onto the table as the tears overtook him in silence. Satoshi watched him with a gentle, understanding smile, without rushing him or asking anything of him. In that way, the two of them remained seated in the restaurant without saying much, IG crying quietly, while his friend stayed by his side. Elsewhere, Miyuki was running down the street with labored breaths, forcing herself to keep going even though she was out of air, and between sobs she repeated that she had to apologize. At last, she arrived and stopped, gasping. Then she straightened up and realized she was standing in front of IG's family restaurant, sweaty and distressed. She reaffirmed to herself that she needed to apologize to him. At that moment, memories struck her with aching nostalgia. She saw herself and IG as children, laughing as he placed a flower crown on her head. Then she remembered him walking at school, with her following timidly behind, embarrassed but happy. She also saw herself helping in the kitchen, and later, already in middle school, walking beside him with a warmth that felt simple and natural. In Miyuki's idealized memory, IG smiled at her with an almost unreal tenderness, and that image pushed her, through tears and determination, to believe she had to win him back, clinging to the idea of a happy future at his side. Thus, Miyuki approached the entrance of IG's house. However, when she turned the corner, she froze at the sight of him accompanied by Ikiju. Her eyes widened completely, struck by absolute shock. From her hiding place, Miyuki saw Ikiju speaking to IG with a soft smile and a natural shyness, and in her mind she recognized Ikiju's name, as if reality were finally crashing down on her. She remained behind the wall, sweating coldly and trying to understand why the most well-known girl in the school was at IG's house. What she saw next unsettled her even more. IG, Ikiju, and IG's mother were talking and laughing together, forming a scene that looked strangely familiar, as if Ikiju fit there without any effort. Ikiju smiled gently as she spoke with IG, and that closeness looked natural, almost every day. Miyuki watched her from behind, extremely tense, and noticed on Ikiju's face an expression she could not possibly ignore, because she knew it was the expression of someone who had fallen in love. With that thought pressing against her chest, Miyuki felt that the one who should understand IG's charms should be her and only her, and that she couldn't allow anyone else to enter that place. She looked at Ikiju, still wearing that gentle smile, and couldn't stop herself from wondering why it had to be her. Hidden, Miyuki began to tremble, trapped between fear and anxiety, feeling that if she didn't do something soon, IG would slip away from her. To justify the danger she felt, her mind ran through everything people said about Ikiju. She remembered that Ikiju came from a distinguished family, excelled academically, and had earned the highest score on the entrance exam. She also thought about how Ikiju stood out in sports, as if she had no weaknesses at all. Then, the image of Ikiju walking through the hallway appeared alongside the murmurs of other students, who said she was well known for rejecting boys, and that, according to rumors, she never accepted anyone's confession. When she put all those pieces together, Miyuki was left in shock, fully grasping that someone else had entered IG's life. However, before she could move, IG's mother suddenly appeared and called her by name, asking what she was doing hiding there. The mother looked at her seriously, and Miyuki felt panic surge through her all at once. Suddenly, she imagined that perhaps the mother already knew, that maybe IG had told her something. With a trembling voice, Miyuki tried to ask if IG was there, and the mother stepped closer with that same seriousness, telling her that he was inside and asking if she needed anything. Miyuki tried to maintain a nervous smile, but no words came out. Then the mother, bowing in a measured apology, said that as a mother, she shouldn't interfere in the relationship between the two of them. Even so, there was something she couldn't ignore. Miyuki was left confused, trying to understand what she meant, and the mother replied that if Miyuki asked herself the question, she would know exactly what she was talking about. That sentence pushed Miyuki straight into panic, and the atmosphere grew heavy in her perception, as if the light had gone out. Miyuki remained standing there, feeling trapped. While the mother's voice continued, she confessed that she had realized something long before IG had, something that changed everything. And then she said it plainly, stating that Miyuki had been unfaithful to her son. The impact showed on Miyuki's face, which seemed to break inwardly, unable to escape. Finally, the mother recalled a specific moment, a meeting of the Merchants Guild where she had been drinking tea, and explained that she had seen Miyuki there, walking happily, hand in hand with a boy who was not IG.